In the last video, we built procedural placement rules from scratch. But what if I told you that you can skip 80% of that work by learning from the pros? Today, I'll show you how to copy Giant's production-ready procedural placement setup from the Asia map, including advanced features which we didn't cover in part 1, and then customize it to match your vision. Stay tuned, you won't get this anywhere else. Hi Virtual Landscape Architect, I'm Nadine. My mission is to build the most complete and practical place for farming simulator modding. In part 1 of this series, we learned the basics of procedural placement, masks, objects and rules. Today, we're going to work smarter, not harder. Instead of building everything from zero, we'll start with a professional setup and then customize it. Let's dive in. As it is often the case with farming simulator, we learn most by looking at the work of the pros. For this video, I would recommend to use the Asian map as a starting point, because there, Giants did a lot with procedural placement. On the US map, not so much. So let's open up the Asian map to see how Giants uses procedural placement in a real published map. I have mine open already. If you have not made your own mod copy of the Asian map, you can do so by going to File, New Mod from Game, and then Map Items, and choose the Asian map. If you need more details on how to do this, I have explained this in depth in a previous video. I will link it for you. Let's have a look at the procedural placement. Let's take a quick tour of what Giants has built here. We start with the masks. You see here, we have a lot of different masks. We have meadow, forest, acres and bushland. And then we have another meadow and another forest. Notice the mask names. The first ones start with PG and the other ones start with Gen. The PG ones are the painted masks. Gen stands for generated. That means that these masks were not painted manually. Instead, they were calculated from other masks using scripts. Let's have a quick look. See that? The PG meadow mask seems to be completely right. Now select the Gen Meadow Update mask. Okay, this looks much more reasonable. In this mask, the fields, roads and the forest have been left out. Let's also check out the forest masks. This is the PG forest. And that looks like a rough outline of how the forest should look like. Let's look at Gen Forest Update. This is a bit different. You see that? Here in the updated one, they have some slopes left out, and on the top of the mountain here, there is a pathway left out. And the road masks? Here Giants has built some automated masks for the roads, and also their borders. We'll see exactly how that works in part 3 of the series. So let's now look at the PP objects. I go back to the PP menu, open the Objects tab. Look at the variety here. We have lots of different foliage types, plants and also bushes down here. Giants named the foliages in the PP object a bit differently like we did in the last video. They use F for foliage, but they also use forest for forest plants. And down here they use B for bushes. But it's only the name, you can do whatever works for you. You might have an issue with your procedural placement menu where it looks like this. The foliage is not listed correctly, foliage names are not matching with the channel names, and some channels show only numbers. And this is how it should look. We don't see all these numbers in the channel names, and also the PP foliage names are in line with the channel names. That issue came up because Giants has made changes to the foliage system with the recent game update, which breaks the PP object setup on this map. If you have this issue and you want to fix your mod copy of the Asian map, I also have a separate video on this, see info card in the corner. There, I show you how to fix it. But you don't have to worry about it for now, because the fix is also included in the script, which I will show you later. Let's move on to the trees. There are also a lot of trees in different stages. Notice how each tree has distance settings over here. This is where the distance matrix comes into play. You will find this setting in the distance matrix tab. Parent trees, small trees, medium trees. Let's switch to the distances tab. See this grid? That's the distance matrix. It controls how far objects have to stay away from each other, like a rulebook for spacing. You reference it in the Objects tabs per object. And it's completely optional. If you don't set it, a default distance will be used. To add a new type, you just have to right-click in the grid. But one thing to know, the matrix is mirrored diagonally. So if you set a distance between medium tree and parent tree, the same setting will be mirrored diagonally over here. Oh, and another thing, the last column has a bug. Clicking anywhere it triggers a delete prompt. So just be careful there. If you need to make changes to this column, the way around it is to add another column, like I did here. I just added a test column so I can make edits to the second last column. Let's now look at the rules. As I told you, Giants has done a lot with procedural placement on the Asian map. I think these are 32 rules. We see various terrain texture rules, foliage layers, and also tree placement rules down here. This is a complete ready-made setup. Let's do a quick tour. The first rule on top is create all masks. Remember when I said earlier that some masks are calculated based on other maps? This is where this happens. It uses the script generate all masks FS25 and these masks. And this will create new gen mask from the PG named mask. We'll go into more detail of this in part 3 of the series. And then we see T-dirt and T-grass. That looks pretty much like what we did in part 1. We define textures with scatter and mask and some with scatter and Perlin noise. If you watched part 1, this will look very familiar to you. Giants also has texture rules for roads and road borders and more, but they all follow the same pattern. There are some clear rules which we did not use yet, for example here, clear grass foliage. Here they use the clear foliage in mask script to remove foliage from the mask's gen acres border inverted. This script will remove any foliage on the mask, whether it was added by procedural placement or manually. You can use this to get rid of plants on roads, fields and slopes, for example. This is exactly what they did in the second clear rule, clear grass foliage mountain. Here they use the gen slope mask to remove foliage from slopes. A bit further down, you see a lot of forest rules. And this is where the Asian map really shines. All of these rules act on the mask gen forest updated. First, they define a base texture, T-forest base, with scatter and mask. And then they use T-forest spatter with scatter and Perlin noise to create some additional patches. And then we have 5 different rules for foliages, all with the scatter and Perlin noise script, but all with different settings for seed and frequency, and with lots of different plants in them. Let's have a look how that looks in the real forest. Giants did a great job in defining these rules to make the forest look very detailed and natural. But the foliage is not all. Let's look at the trees. The rule trees forest uses the scatter and mask script. That means we fill the area completely. Here you also see the object min distance and the slope end in use. So that means the objects have to be at least 18 meters apart, and they will only be placed if the slope is less than 40 degrees. And look at the rule objects. This rule places the main trees. You can see that they are all stage 4. But notice that there are child rules defined. Seed trees various and seed trees pine sill. That means for every large tree it places, it will automatically also execute the child rules. For the child rules, we also have some additional settings in the table. Child min count and child max count steer the number of child objects. So we have between 8 and 20 child trees per big one. And in child min radius and child max radius, you define the radius in which the child objects are placed. Here we have a radius of 20 meters around the big tree with a minimum of 4 meters. These settings create natural looking clusters with a few really big trees and then lots of smaller trees around them, exactly how you would find in a real forest. Let's look at the child rules. C-Trees Various also uses the scatter in mask script, but here you can see that the main rule is ticked off. This setting is always on by default, but if you have a child rule which should only be executed based on another rule, you switch it off. The object minimum distance is set to 2 meters, and slope end is also 40 degrees. In natural words, for every big tree which gets placed, it automatically adds up to 20 smaller trees within a 20-meter radius. Every main tree has this cluster effect. If that sounds too complicated to you, don't worry. Parent-child rules are completely optional. You don't have to use them. Okay, now we are really excited about what is possible with procedural placement, and we want to set up something like this for our own map. Here's the magic. We can copy all of this into our own map. The procedural placement settings are stored in the map's i3D file. When you open the i3D file in a text editor and search for procedural placement, you easily find these settings. Here we have the distance settings, we have the objects which are defined, including the trees, and we have the rules themselves. If you're not familiar with i3D files yet, check out my video on the topic. I'll put a link in the corner. You could now go on and copy and paste these settings into your map manually. But that would be a very time-consuming activity because you would have to adjust all the file references manually. Here in the PP objects, you have all these reference files. And the foliage channel all have ID numbers, which are basically also file references. And they are most likely different on your own map. You would need to look up which file ID each object has on your map and then update it. The same goes for the PP mask files, which are referenced in the Procedural Placement mask section of the i3D file. Also here you can see all these file IDs. I will not explain how to make these adjustments in detail, because nobody wants to do this manually. Instead, I created a script for you which copies the PP settings from a different map file and inserts them into your own map. The script will adjust all the file references automatically as far as possible. So, how to use that script? You can download the script copy PP from i3D link in the video description and add it to your Giants editor. If you need help with installing or running scripts, please check out my scripts video. I'll put a link to that in the corner. This is the script. This script actually needs some settings, and that's why we have to open it in an editor. You can either use the built-in editor or an external editor. Let's check out the top section of the script. Here you find a comment with a step-by-step instruction. After that, there is an area with settings. It starts with settings in capital letters and ends with end settings down here. Let's go through the settings. The first setting, source i3D, is already the most important one. Here you define from which map you want to copy the PP settings. By default, I put the base game Asian map in there. I use the $ notation, so the script will find your game installation path on its own, as long as you have set your game installation path in the GE preferences. But if you ever use the new mod from game menu, you will already have that. You can also specify any other map file here, either base game or another one. I also put some examples on how to reference these paths instead. So you could replace this with any other path. Just keep in mind that the Giants editor uses slashes instead of backslashes. So if you copy a path from the Windows Explorer, you have to change the backslashes to slashes. With the second setting, override PP target, you can tell the script if you want to override existing PP settings in your target map, or if you want to append the copied entries as additional objects and rules and keep the existing ones. The default is true, so it will override existing PP settings, and you can start with a clean copy of the PP settings from the other map. If you already have PP settings on your map and you want to keep them, set this option to false. Then it will append the copied entries to the existing ones in your map file. Please note that in append mode it will not copy the distance matrix and you might need to do some manual adjustments there. If you set the third setting, Add Foliage Types, to true, it will check if the source i3D map has more paintable foliage types than your existing map. If it does, it will try to add any missing foliage types to your map. But it can do that only if there is still room for another foliage type in your foliage layers. For example, the Asian map has a foliage type named ground foliage, and the US map does not. And it is nice to have it because it adds more options to the ground foliage, which you can have on your map. In this case, the script will try to add this foliage type to your map file. It will inform you in the console output if it succeeded or not. If it succeeded, the new entry will be at the bottom of your paintable foliages list in order not to mess up any existing foliage. The fourth setting, Dry Run, will allow you to do a dry run before making any actual changes to your map file. The default is false, so it will make the changes to your map. But if you prefer to do an optional test run first, you set it to true. Then the script will not do anything to your i3D file. Instead, it will only write in the console what it would do. This way you can check if your settings work before making any real changes. Let me set it to true so we can see what this does. The setting Create Missing Masks equals true will create blank black mask files in your target map structure if the reference file does not exist in your target map. This saves you from fiddling around with the mask files. Instead, you can immediately start drawing on your new masks. If you prefer not to create any mask files, set it to false. But then you will have to take care of the mask files manually. The other settings are not that important and you can leave them as they are. Now save the script. If you use an external editor for the changes, you also need to reload the script environment in GE with the button. Then open your map file. Or if your map file is already open, make sure it is saved, because you will lose unsaved changes. And as always, make sure you have a backup of your i3D file before running the script. Let's check out how the PP menu looks before executing the script. This is basically what we defined in part 1. I also like to empty out the console before I start a script, so I can be sure all console content is coming from my script. I do that with right-click and select Clear. Then find the script in your menu and execute it. Since I set the script to dry run equals true, it printed the output to the console. Let's quickly go through the output. First, it gives you some info about the source and target i3D files. If you see something there, everything is fine with a link to the source i3D file. In the comment remap build, it informs you how many file references needed to be adjusted and how many were added. Then, in the comments about foliage, it informs you about the conversions it made there. Here you see that it was able to add the ground foliage to my map. Then we have some comments about missing mask files. It tells us that there were 18 mask files in the source i3D, which we did not have in our target i3D. Because I left the create missing mask on true, it would create these mask files for us. But because it's a dry run, it just informs us what it would create, but doesn't actually create anything. Then we have some comments about converted foliage references. And at the end, we have some orange comments where it says that some foliage channels could not be converted. This is F grass medium and F acre. Orange comments generally tell you that you have to do something manually with it. For F grass medium, it tells you that grass middle does not exist on the target map. Yes, that is because it was renamed to grass medium and not middle in the US map. And F acre can't be found because it's actually not a foliage but a terrain detail. And then we have an orange block where it tells us that there are rule objects which are not present in the current map. This is because some textures do exist in the Asian map but do not exist in the US map. And for these rules, we need to change the textures to something which exists on our map. And lastly, it informs us that it is not saving anything because it was a dry run. So let's now do the real run. We go back to the script editor and change the dry run setting back to false. Then we save the script, reload the script environment, and then execute the script again. Once again, I clear my console before doing it. We mostly get the same results in the console. But this time, it informs us that it created mask files. We also see some pp mask comments over here. And we also get these textures, which we need to update. And at the end, it tells us that it was processed successfully and saved. And it tells us to reload the map file in the Giants editor to see the changes. So let's do that. I click the green circle here in the menu. Okay, it has reloaded, so let's check out what the script did. First, let's check if it added some foliage. Yes, it did. We do have the ground foliage now in our list. Let's try it. Let me paint some big branches and some cover foliage, maybe some ferns. This is not available on the US map, but it is available on the Asian map, and we copied it from there. So let's check out the PP settings now. Here we have all the mask files which we also had on the Asian map. We also have the PP objects, and we also see that the channel names are listed correctly and we don't have these weird numbers in it, so that has been corrected also. And in the PP rules, we have all the rules which we had on the Asian map, ready to adjust to our liking in our own project. Please note that all the rules have been copied in their inactive state to be on the safe side. To activate them, just check the box in the rules list. But as we saw in the orange entries in the console, we have to change some textures in the rules which were used in the PP settings, but where the textures are not present on the US map. So let's go back and find that section over here. And then let's go through these rules and adjust the textures. First it says rule T-dirt. There dirt and dirt leaf was used, and both is not available on the US map, so we have to change that. I will use grass as a default instead, and instead of dirt leaf, let me use grass patchy. Apply changes. Next rule we need to adjust is T-grass. And there we have grass mix and grass dry, which we need to adjust. So for grass mix, I also want grass patchy. Oh, it didn't take it. It went back to grass mix, and that is because grass patchy was also the last selection I made before this one, and that is a bit buggy. So in this case, you just select something else and then go back and select what you really wanted. Unfortunately, that's a small bug in this menu. So, and grass dry, that does exist, but it doesn't have an underscore in the name in the US map. So let's update that. I will update the rest of the rules in time-lapse. For the forest textures, instead of only adjusting the copied settings, let's also make some tweaks. We saw earlier in the forest rules that the basis for the ground texture was a rocky texture, and since my map here is absolutely flat, rocks don't make that much sense, so let's adjust that. Let's use something more suitable in the forest base and forest spatter rules. So instead of rocks, I will use forest grass and forest leaves. And some grassy textures. Okay, now we adjusted the textures. Let's select which rules we want to test on our map and actually run the procedural placement. I will activate all the rules related to forest, including the trees, because that's what I want to try. As we saw earlier, the forest rules work with the Gen Forest Update mask. So we have to paint something on this mask in order to try it out. So let me activate the painting. Select the Forest Update mask and paint something. I have a really big brush right now, so to get a big area. Actually, also check your block mask if you have anything on there so that it doesn't block. Yeah, I do. So I have to delete this with right-click painting. And then I save my map file before I execute the rules. After the save is done, I click on Execute Rules. And look at that. We got ourselves a forest. And wow, look at that. We get a huge forest out of these copied settings. Can you see how detailed that is? And we did not spend hours in setting this up, but only minutes. I really love this. Let me add some warnings about the console. You do get some red error messages in the console when executing the procedural placement rules, like this one. But if the errors say something about PP debug mask, you can ignore them. This is unfortunately another bug which was introduced with that recent update. I made a YouTube short video which explains how to fix these errors, but since you have to modify a base game file in order to fix it, the error will be back after the next game update, unless Giants fixes it. You can also choose to ignore them. Everything still worked fine. That's it for today. If this script saved you time, a like and a subscribe would really mean a lot. It helps me keep making tools like this for you. Click here for part 1 of the series, or here for another video which you might enjoy. Don't be a stranger. See you next time.